Hey there, good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Connie. I'm Connie Fuksa with Foote Title Group. Hope you guys are having an amazing start to your week this week. Some of you enjoyed the holiday yesterday. Some actually had to work. I'm sorry that you had to do that. But as I try to do every week, I want to come to you and explain different things that have to do with the home closing process to help you understand what some of the things that you may experience mean. Also to spur some questions. You know, a lot of the things we talk about are questions that people have brought to me either in the recent times through our broadcast, maybe through a closing. So they're all good questions and they're all things that people don't understand. And so I really encourage you, if you have a question about something about a closing that happened, a closing that's getting ready to happen, maybe something that happened a while ago, or maybe you just heard a term on the news that you didn't understand. I may not know the answers to all of these things, but because of the experience that I have, I've had a lot of different experiences with different parts of the closing, mortgage, real estate process. And so if I don't know the answers, I certainly can direct you to some great professionals that we work with. So I wanted to talk today about, as we've been talking about through January, different terms that you may hear or experience through the closing process. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and when you are on, feel free to reach out and say hi. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hey, Skip, how are you? Good morning there, Miss Billy. How are you today? Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I want to talk today about one of the terms that comes up a lot and how it works in the process, because this is a piece on real estate that people don't understand because they try to equate it to vehicles or motorhomes or things that go through the Department of Motor Vehicles. The ownership process is totally different than it is with a home. So today the word we're going to talk about is a deed. And a deed is the actual document that transfers the ownership from one person to another. You cannot transfer ownership to property without a deed anywhere unless it goes through some things like an estate process or a court procedure. If it's individuals selling a piece of property, they cannot sell a piece of property without doing a deed. Now, like I said, there's a few outside circumstances, but those are in extreme situations that have specific particular kind of rules on some things that are happening in that scenario. But for all intent and purposes, a deed actually transfers the ownership. So a deed is a legal document that is drawn up that describes the property that's being sold, explains who the people are that are selling, and that must be all of the people that currently have ownership of that property. And then it talks about who is actually going to be taking ownership of that property. And there's some very specific descriptions about that property, where the property is located, what the tax information, where it's located in the land records and the tax records, and the actual legal description of that property. Now, very rarely does it have the actual address of the property, because the address of the property can be a duplicated thing. As you may know, in your particular community, there may be several Smith Streets or Jones Way. There may be a lot of streets that have similar names or the same name, and so it can get confused. A legal description is a very specific description of one piece of property and how it's defined in the land records in the state and county where that property is located. And so that's going to define that piece of property on the deed. And also on the deed, there's going to be a clause that explains the previous ownership deed. And the reason for that is because anyone searching the land records will actually search backwards to find out who the different owners were through that ownership, thereby making sure that all those owners have actually signed their ownership interest going forward, so we make sure that everybody was included in that. So a deed is the only thing that can transfer the title to a property in when you're dealing with a piece of real estate. Now, I bring this up because sometimes you may come across things like, if you're dealing in a divorce situation, maybe you have a husband and a wife who got divorced. The wife gets the ownership of the property in the divorce decree. And so once they do the divorce decree, they assume that's the end of the process. The husband goes on and does what he's going to do with his life. The wife stays in the home, assumes she owns it, and goes to sell it and can't, because she did not take ownership through a deed. So now we have to track down that husband and have him sign off on a deed transferring his ownership right to her. Now, if he passed away because they got divorced, now you're dealing with an estate process that then we must track down who now could be the owner and have them sign a deed transferring it to that wife. So there's a lot of different things that could come up, and what I want to really bring to your attention is that a deed is the only thing that can transfer ownership. So when you're talking to someone about a piece of property you want to sell and they're asking you questions about that, a realtor or a mortgage lender, or if you're doing a refinance and you own a piece of property with someone else, let's say that same scenario, you can't refinance that property by yourself without that other person signing off if they're still on the deed. So you want to make sure that anything that's happened in your ownership, that as that has happened, you made sure that a deed was done to make sure that the ownership that you have now is what you expect to have. Maybe someone was added to the ownership of the property. You got married, your husband had a piece of property that a home that you both live in now, and you haven't been added to that ownership yet. You'll want to make sure that happens, because you want to make sure that if something was to happen, that you have that ownership that you both expect for you to have. So the deed is the only thing that transfers ownership. The deed is the only thing that gives you ownership. So you want to make sure, if you are intended to have an ownership in a piece of property, that a deed's been done to do that, to add you to that ownership. So hopefully I helped you with a little bit of information today. As I said, we talk about transferring property, terms, anything to do with closing, real estate, and mortgages throughout the year. So if you have a question, I have a lot of things I talk about based on questions that have been asked. But if you have a question about something specifically that I haven't talked about, reach out to me. You don't have to do it publicly. You can message me individually. You can email me, Connie at footetitlegroup.com. You can message or email any of our team. They're all on our website, www.footetitlegroup.com. And the other thing is, I want to point out, there's lots and lots of resources on our website. So go on there, check out those resources, and make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to understand all of the steps of the process. And certainly reach out and ask us any questions. In Maryland and Virginia, our team is very well versed in answering any of those questions for you. So I hope you guys have a fantastic Tuesday. I look forward to talking to you again real soon. And I thank you so much for tuning in to Coffee with Connie. I'm Connie Fuksa with Foote Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.